Hi everybody, this is Maureen Wong for yournextstamp.com. Today we're going to be making this really cute watercolor deer card that says have a happy day. I wanted to use they're not new product, but they're new to me and they're a really hot product right now, the Zig Clean Color Real Brush Markers. So I thought this would be a good time to try those out and hopefully give you a little bit of watercoloring lesson if you're a beginner watercolorist. So let's get started. Okay, to start off we're using this Oh Dear set, and I'm speeding up the video because it took me a really long time to make this video, and I'm sure you don't want to sit through it all. So I'm picking out the stamp that I want to use, which is the deer that's kind of running or jumping, and I made a mistake and forgot my foam pad for using the Misty with clear stamps, and I'm treating with my anti-static powder bag because I'm planning on embossing this in clear. I have my VersaFine Onyx Black, and I just found out recently reading a tip on the internet that you can emboss your VersaFine because it does take a little while to dry. So I'm using my Stampin' Up! Crystal Clear Embossing Powder, and I'm going to heat that until it's all melted. Okay, so now our image is completely heat embossed, and I just wanted to tell you in case you didn't know, do not use a dye-based ink for watercoloring because when the water hits the ink lines, they will run. So you want to use something that's not going to run. I used my VersaFine and embossed it. You can use archival inks or stays on inks. You just want to be careful that you don't get stays on inks on your Misty. But embossing is a good choice because it'll keep the color within the areas that you want them to be in. So that's actually a really good thing sometimes for beginners or... Okay, so now we're going to start coloring, but first we need a few things. These are called Craftmates Lockables. I got this idea from Jennifer McGuire. They have a bunch of little compartments, and you can fill each compartment with water and use it until it gets dirty and then go on to the next one. Or you can dedicate a compartment to each color that you're using so you have fresh water for each color. And so that's a really handy tip. With the brushes, I just got these from Joann.com, and they're watercolor round brushes. I have a few different sizes. This is a size 6, a size 1, and a 3/0. And I don't know if there's a specific terminology for what that is, like if it's a 0.3 or if it's just called 3/0, but that's what it is. And then you can use a water brush, but I actually prefer to not use the water brush because I feel like I can't control the water. But you can just use it as a brush, empty, and dip it in water if you want, and that's another option for you. And then you'll need a towel or paper towels to dry off your brush and pick up excess water off your project. And I've gone ahead and picked out 3 colors here. That was black, and this is mid-brown and beige. And I'm going to zoom in so you can really see what I'm doing here. But first I'm going to cut out this little deer from this big piece of paper because I really like turning my paper when I color, so it's easier to turn a small piece of paper than a big piece of paper. So now we're going to start, and you put down the color in the area that you want to be the darkest. So I'm putting just a little bit on the bottom of the face here, and then I'm going to get my brush wet and wipe it off just a little bit to make sure I don't have too much water on that, and then blend out the color into the white areas, and you just keep pulling and pulling the color until it runs white, and that will make it so that you don't have harsh lines at the end of your color. And then you can put down some more color and do the same thing, blend that out until it turns white or until you've got your area completely filled that you want to be colored. and you go back over what you've previously done so that everything blends together and evens out. Okay, now I'm going to put down some more color here. This is on the back ear, and it's just all the same process of putting down a little bit of color, starting it where you want it the darkest, wetting your brush, and then drawing the color out into the areas that are uncolored. And you just repeat this over and over and over again. It's a simple technique, but the thing that you have to learn is how you work with it and how much water you need to use, how much color you want to put down. I really like a softer watercolor look, so I'm not using that much color. But if you like something more vibrant and dark, then you could put down a lot more color, use a lot less water. In fact, with these pens, you could use no water at all and just blend the pens out themselves. You can use a lighter pen to blend out a darker pen. That's one option. Or you can just color in the whole area with that one marker. And I really like these markers because they get into really fine spots. You can see that I got between the bow tails and very small lines on the leg that was in back of this front leg. So I really am liking these pens for the fact that you can do such fine detail, or if you want, you can squash them down and get broad swatches of color. So I'm just going to continue coloring here, and I'm going to speed this up just a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just finishing up coloring the body here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some parts of it white, but the face I think I'm going to color in. So I'm going to come back in with that same beige because it will look just too stark white after I finish coloring and doing all the shading for the rest of the image. So I'm going to come back in with that same color, but I'm going to put down even less color than I did before so that her face will be even just a little bit lighter than the rest of her head and body. So you can see that that is barely colored, but it makes a big difference not to have it just a big area of stark white paper. Okay, now that I've let it dry, I can come in with my shading, and actually I've picked a different color, but you can come in with shading with the same pen. If you just add more color, it'll get darker and darker, and you use hardly any water and don't draw the color out as much. It's not a really dramatic shading effect, but you can get shadowed effect with that same color pen. But in this case, I am going to use the mid brown to do my shading. So the shading is very similar to just the regular coloring, except you're not pulling the color all the way out into the uncolored portions. Basically what you're doing is drawing in very little shadow areas, and then you're going to take your brush and water and just soften out that line, and you're not really drawing the color out too far. It's just coming out a little bit and softening the edges of the line that you drew. And what I'm doing is I'm placing my brush on its side, sort of, and just putting the tip into the color of the marker that I just drew and wiggling it back and forth to soften the line and draw the color out just a little bit. And that is my technique for shading. So I'm going to continue shading the rest of this, and I'll speed it up a little bit more. Okay, now it's time to color her nose in, so I'm taking the black and I'm using no water and on the hooves to color those in, just straight black with no water. And now I'm going to do a little bit of shading on the white areas, and you can use a light gray marker, but I'm using black just to show you here that it just depends how much color you put down, what effect you're going to get. So I put very, very, very little black. Or what you can do is you can scribble on a piece of plastic and just take a little bit of black, and it waters it down to a gray when you add water, and you can get a nice little white shadow that way. But if you get too much color, what you do is just add some water, and then you're going to blot it off with your towel, and that should remove any excess color. I had some little spots on my paper, so I removed those the same way. Now I'm going back to my color chart here to pick a color for the mouth, and I picked pale pink. And I'm coloring in the mouth with that pale pink, and then back to the color chart again for a lemon yellow for the bow. And I'm basically coloring most of that in just with the pen, but I came back in with my detail brush to bring out the yellow just a little bit. And that is basically the finished product, except that I found that I wanted to do a little more shading on the legs. And I had to be very, very careful because I had already put down that black color, so you don't want to get your brush into the black and make it super dark when you're drawing out those shadings. And there you go. I wanted to tell you this is, or show you I guess, this is the paper that I was using, Fabriano 90-pound studio watercolor paper. I got it off of Amazon and I bought it. It's a 9x12 packet and it has 100 sheets in it, which seems excessive, but I think that when you have a lot of paper to work with, you get more adventurous because you're not as afraid to ruin it. So I think you can get some really good results when you have a lot to play with. And what I do is I cut the 9x12 sheets down into 4 equal pieces, 4.5 by 6 each. And those are my little sheets to work on because I don't do big pieces of art. So I just cut out little bits if I need to, but for now, I'm going to leave it whole. I've got the stitched square die set from Your Next Stamp. I'm taking this one and I'm going to trace around it so I know where my square is going to cut out of my watercolor paper. And the reason why I don't cut first is because sometimes the water can tend to pool around the edges of your die cut. And I don't want that effect here. I just want it to be regular flat watercoloring, so I'm going to cut it after I do my coloring. So I'm basically just picking out 2 more colors, and I'm telling you how messy my space is here and how I don't have very much workable room. And let's zoom in so we don't have to look at the mess. And I'm picking out a light blue for the sky, and then I'm going to use May green for the grass. So I want to start the sky at the ground line, but I want to make sure that my deer fits in there how I want it. So I'm drawing my ground line, but I don't want it to be just a straight ground line, so I put a little curve into it. And then what I'm going to do is get my water, and I got this big fat brush. It's also a number 6, but I'm not sure what kind of brush it is. I'm basically just using it to load up a lot of water and draw that blue up into the sky. You can use any kind of bigger brush here, and I'm adding more marker because the marker was really light and I accidentally got some black in there, so I'm blotting that off, and it comes off right away because I have so much water. So now I'm going to try again and scribble some more blue onto my background, and then get my brush and wash that out into a nice light blue sky. Then you're going to let this dry thoroughly or hit it with your heat tool. Okay, now once that's done, if you think it's too light, you can go back in with more color, or you can even use a darker blue pen. Now I'm going to come in with my May green, and I want to start at the bottom of my square because that's where I want my grass to be the darkest. I don't want it to be the darkest right at the skyline. Then I'm going to drag my water and color up to the skyline, and it doesn't have to be nice or neat. If you go out of the lines, it doesn't matter because we're going to be die cutting this out, but I just want to make a nice blend of that green. I don't want a harsh line at the bottom, and I don't want too much overlap with the sky. And once that's dry, then I can die cut it out. I'm going to tape it down because it's warped and I don't want it to move while I'm die cutting. After you die cut, if you want, you can actually run this through your die cut machine a couple more times, sandwiched in between a couple of clear plates, and that will make it flatten out even more. But I'm not too worried about that because I'm going to be using lots of adhesive to stick this down. So let me get some of those supplies together and I'll be right back. Here I've got my Misty back out because I want to stamp my sentiment on my card front, and I forgot to clean off that deer and take that away. So I'm using a grid. This is my rule of thirds grid, just to make sure that my sentiment is straight. And I'm taking the Have a Happy Day sentiment from the same Oh Dear set and putting that down centered and hopefully straight. Then I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to take away all the extra bits there, and I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink again, which is my go-to for sentiments, and that came out perfectly. And now to mount my square, I'm going to actually use a piece of fun foam, which is another tip from Jennifer McGuire. And what that does is it makes sure that you have a nice solid backer to your square, and you don't have just little pieces of foam tapes and sagging areas. I'm just going to use my ATG gun to adhere this to the fun foam, and then I'm going to use my ATG gun to adhere the fun foam piece to my card base. And sorry, there's a little bit of dirt that got on my panel from my craft mat. I'm trying to get that off. And now for my deer, I'm going to get out some foam tape and cut it up into little pieces to fit on the back of my deer. And I actually could use my same die and cut this piece out of foam, fun foam, instead of using foam tape. But the thing is, sometimes when you're running things through your die cutting machine, they tend to stretch because fun foam is a little bit stretchy. And if it stretches out, then it's not going to fit exactly behind the die cut. So you'd have to trim it to make sure that it fits. And I didn't want to bother with that, so I hand cut my fun foam square for that, and I used the foam tape for my deer. Okay, so I'm just going to stick my deer down and I'm done. And I hope you liked that, and we hope to see you over at yournextstamp.com, and thank you very much for watching.